And we are live here at Support World Virtual for our first session of the day. Welcome, everyone. And I'm going to throw it over to Liz Beavers just for a brief welcome.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Roy. And good morning or good afternoon, some of you. Thank you so much for joining us. This first session today at Support World Virtual is sponsored by SolarWinds. It's a pleasure having all of you, and we're so excited to dive into this topic further.
It's great to be here. We at HDI welcome you. There's Julie Moore waving and Valence Allen waving and Liz Beavers waving. So I'm going to do some introductions of the speakers today. And there is Q&A available to you. If you'd like to put a question in the chat for us, please do. We'll answer those questions as time permits. And I just have some basic information for you about our speakers today. Julie Moore, who just waved at you, is a dynamic, engaging change agent who brings integrity and passion to everything through her books, articles, speaking, consulting, and teaching. Her purpose is to change the world through thought-provoking dialogue and interaction. And I've taken a couple of Julie's classes, and I highly recommend them. She's awesome. She's an ITIL expert, certified help desk director, certified governance IT professional. She educates audience worldwide on topics of leadership, business, knowledge management, service management, governance, organization development, process engineering, service level management, and continual improvement, and probably tennis ball bouncing and other things that she hasn't listed here. Liz Beavers is a seasoned IT service management professional who has served many years as the technical point of contact for SolarWinds service desk customers. Her ITSM and ITIL focus supports customers of varying sizes and verticals through their implementation, ongoing support, and education. When she's not working with clients on how to improve their service management strategy, you can often find her hosting webcasts and podcasts on an array of service management topics. She's ITIL 4 certified and has never met a dog she didn't want to adopt.
If you couldn't tell.
I can relate to that. As a principal research director and CIO practice at Infotech Research Group, Valence Howden has an extensive experience in helping organizations be successful by optimizing how they govern themselves, how they design and execute strategies, and how they drive service excellence in all work. With 30 years of IT experience in the public and private sector, Valence has developed experience in many information management and technology domains with a particular focus on the areas of service management, enterprise and IT governance, development and execution of strategy, risk management, metrics design, and process design, and client-facing roles at Bell Canada and CGI Group, as well as managing the design, integration, and implementation of services and processes in the Ontario public sector. Well, I feel very inadequate, but I'm Roy Atkinson, and I'm the group principal analyst here at HDI, and I'm happy to be hosting this get-together of some brilliant folks in our world. And I'm going to be firing out questions, and they're going to be responding to me and maybe to each other. We'll see how that goes. And as I mentioned, if you want to pop some questions in, please do. We'll be looking at those as we go. So is IT service management still IT service management, or have we graduated to something broader than that now? Valence, why don't we start with you?
I would love to say that we've graduated from it to an extent. And I think there's a necessity for that because the digital world has sort of forced services to be looked at hopefully, across the entire organization as opposed to just being seen as technology. So I think we're in the process of graduating, and I think COVID-19 may have accelerated that a little bit. But even as I talk to clients, I don't think we're entirely there yet. I think a lot of people are still even grounded in the foundations and still working on the foundational aspects. So I don't think that shift has fully happened. I think it's happened in more digitally enabled or digitally focused organizations right now.
Julie?
I don't think service management will ever not be relevant or be applicable. I think so much of it is dictated on where your organization is today, how much there is a need to, invest in, adopting methodologies that can help improve the environment. I think one of the major advantages of version 4 is that the view of that has significantly changed. Instead of it being process oriented, we're now thinking about figure out where you are today incrementally improve. I don't know of an organization in the rapid pace of change that we face today is not always going to be faced with, okay, we've now launched this new initiative. Where can we improve? I think the biggest thing that's happened with service management is that we now, I know we've talked a really good talk about needing to bring the business into things. But, when we start looking at enterprise service management, I don't know any business process that doesn't rely so significantly on technology. We're no longer a shop that we set up somewhere. We are the business. I mean, we propel the business. So it makes it even more important that we have established methodologies and we have built practices into our environment that allow us to keep up with the rapid pace of change without the organizational structure failing and delivery processes failing. I mean, we have such a need for our organizations to adapt and adopt as quickly as possible to make sure that the businesses can sustain their position in the marketplace and innovate.
Liz, did you have something to add to that
Yeah.
about service management?
Absolutely. And just really to echo Valence and Julie, I think so much of where we stand today with service management paired with what came with ITIL 4 and the changing climate that we're in with the pandemic is not only a transition to making sure everything is digitized and readily available for everybody that's interfering with your service management strategies, but also this notion of retaining culture with this pivot. I think that was a huge element with ITIL 4. But I think particularly with service management and where we currently stand and where we might be gearing toward the future, it's culture and really keeping the notion of employees at the core of all the decisions that are being made, how processes are being implemented and considered. So really having kind of the notion of the consumer at the heart of everything that you're delivering and building around.
Great, thank you. And yes, concentration on value with ITIL 4 is a big change, but kind of a drastic change to ITIL. So we've talked about ITIL 4 a little bit, and Julie, you talked about the importance of methodologies and frameworks. What new frameworks or methodologies do you see on the horizon, if any?
There's all this talk about digital transformation and trying to help organizations propel themselves into new avenues. In my research, which has been primarily focused recently in artificial intelligence and the use of bots, I think when we look at combining artificial intelligence, machine learning, with the operational environment. I mean, part of the reason why we struggle so much in IT operations to exceed customers' expectations is because the environments are complex. We're slow to react. And so bringing in AI ops, right, where we are now looking at leveraging artificial intelligence to analyze what we're doing in operations, to come up with patterns, to be much more proactive in taking the human element out of that so that we can, the easy stuff, the stuff that technology can so readily handle, we can focus our efforts on doing the things that help to innovate and propel and drive us in new directions. So this is, it used to be, we talked about this as an emerging field, but this is where we are. And organizations need to be looking at bringing technologies in that can help to drive artificial intelligence. They need strong methodologies around knowledge management, interconnecting all these systems across business processes and IT processes and systems so that we have a much better view of the entire enterprise so that we can really focus on doing, improving that customer experience. That's all that data that can drive a significant competitive advantages for organizations, but knowing what to do with it, is it good data? These are challenges that we are faced with. And I think this is one of the most important considerations for organizations now.
Thanks, Julie. Valence, did you have thoughts about up and coming frameworks and methodologies?
I might parrot a little bit of what Julie was saying first, and just the concept of bring AI to bear in terms of all the data. We have tons of data points, but I think the data science, the data governance, the data handling is going to become critically important. because there's so much data that's not consistent, that's not clean, that we can't guarantee in terms of how valid the information is. So getting that knowledge management, the data handling, the data science aspect into what we're able to use is what's going to enable the AI side to move forward. We're seeing the automation, we're seeing the chatbots, we're seeing some of those technologies come to bear. But once you get into unstructured learning with that data, there's so many elements you have to get into. And I don't know, we use a lot of structured learning with AI. This is what it should be. This is what the output should be. This is how you look at it, and it's able to work. But with unstructured data, with complexity and complicated scenarios, you have to have the algorithms able to execute in a way that doesn't require you to tell them what the output's supposed to be. So as that develops, and there's the area where I don't think we're there yet, that's where we're going to see the real jump in the next 10 years. Framework-wise, I see more aggregation of frameworks than I see development of something entirely new. I think things like service management, product management, they're sort of on a collision course to being the same thing again. They're trying to do the same thing. We look at products and services differently, but there is a certain similarity in a lot of the work that gets done. And as service management moves more towards velocity and speed and agility, it's starting to resemble a lot more of the elements that are there. So I think we've caught up to where some of that was going. And it was that old saying, we weren't out the door, but we were being handed our hat in certain aspects of what we were doing. And I think we're actually not out the door anymore. But I think we've brought in some of those practices. So I think we're going to see aggregation of those. And probably things like SIAM are going to become more important, because if nothing else, we've seen multiple vendors, cloud vendor scenarios with people working from home. The importance of aggregating that for service is going to become important. So I think that'll elevate that particular element of service management.
It's probably a topic on its own, but one of the things, if we have time to think about, is how has this entire pandemic scenario accelerated some of the things that organizations were doing in the first place? But Liz, did you have anything to add about for up and coming methodologies or frameworks?
I really liked what Valence was saying in terms of that aggregation. And I think, truthfully, in some of the motions that were made and changes applied within ITIL 4, that's really becoming evident. The notion of those guiding principles and things like value, thinking and working holistically are really going to help incite further collaboration across different service providers that are really working towards the same initiatives. So at the end of the day, it's not only going to benefit from those who are doing these practices and defining these processes, regardless of, like you mentioned, being in product management, on the service side, or with DevOps, but it's helping them work towards the same initiative. And that's what's the outlook from those people who are interacting and asking for help from those providers.
And along those lines, we have a question. It says, since you've covered ITSM question with a focus on customer and business value, do you see service recovery moving into the mainstream? And they say they have put a strong program in place. So I'm curious to see what you think specifically about that and the role that service recovery might play in a broader sense across the organization.
If I could, I want to start with that, because there was another comment that came out of the conversation of the frameworks that I think is relative to the answer to this question. I am of the firm belief, and Roy, you know that knowledge management has been one of my core focuses. And I think we have, for the last decade or so, focused on knowledge management as a way to react to things, react and respond as efficiently as we can, use the knowledge that we have learned. And I think where we're seeing this move forward is, instead of reacting, we're using knowledge now to be proactive. Innovate, figure out what our customers really want. How can we deliver services that excite versus just meet expectations? And when I look at something like this question where we talk about recovery, I see knowledge and artificial intelligence driving that through automation, as opposed to humans having to intervene and react to something and recover services. That this is something that, we can't respond as fast as a machine can. So, and when we look at companies today that have these just ridiculous availability of services, that's not humans, fixing problems. That's, redundancy, putting things in the cloud. It's about automation. It's about empowering the infrastructure to heal itself, as opposed to having to have humans involved in that. So when I look at recovery, it's not that recovery is not important. And I think that's a very strong bridge to build from. but I still see recovery as being reactionary, not being proactive. We should be building systems that don't go down in the first place and can self-heal versus getting really good process-oriented recovery programs that help to collaborate our organization and come together to restore something that our customers need.
Well said. And I think that might feed into another question that we've got here. If we just take one more step from recovery and that self-healing idea, the whole idea of self-service and self-help has become really, really important lately. There's a lot of people doing a lot of work and a lot of tools that are coming out in that regard. So how does self-help customer service work and feed into that idea of rapid recovery or proactive customer experience and employee experience for that matter? Because a lot of organizations do internal support, right? So we're talking about the employees getting services recovered rapidly or not having services go down. Liz, did you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I love this one, and I find this to be so passionate because I'm a consumer every day. We all are. So I think so much of what things we're putting into place, just like Julie mentioned, machines can do it pretty quickly and effectively. So leaning on recommendations propelled by AI to assist in case deflection, it's going to make for a much better experience across the board. I think about when I'm having problems with like my MacBook, or when I was going through some changes at the DMV, having self-service really helped propel my experience. I got my answers faster. I was able to get my work done during my workday, which there are small windows that can be found there. So having those elements of automation with suggestions made by a machine, it doesn't remove the element of the human experience that you're still getting when you're putting in and reporting there being an issue. But having recommendations being made helps me operate a bit more efficiently as the consumer. And then in the next scenario, I'm more likely to go and look at that vat of knowledge so that I can do this on my own. So that notion of employee or user empowerment, so that they're taking better advantage of the different pieces of content and resources that you work to cultivate as a service provider, I think is really huge in terms of what your customer experience strategy is paired with service management operations.
Great, thanks so much. Good question that just came in, and it said, how do you get employees to embrace self-help? And actually HDI did some research on that right at the end of 2019. And one of the things that we discovered was that the reason organizations are putting self-help into place in the first place is because employees want it. 33% of organizations said because our employees want it, and 29% of organizations said we can't get them to adopt it. So somewhere in the middle, there's this disconnection between the request and the execution. And what are some things, Valence, you nodded heartily on that one. So I'm going to go to you and say, what are some of the things that organizations can do better in terms of self-help?
I think for me, a lot of it is understanding the customer, understanding the user that you're serving. I think a lot of things get implemented because I think that's what you want. But that validation, that relationship, that understanding of why they want it isn't necessarily there. I tend to see the disconnect between, yeah, I wanted that service, but when I got it, it wasn't what I was expecting. It doesn't meet the actual need I had. So just the disconnect to me tends to happen when what someone wants is not the same as what they've either asked for because we didn't dig or they didn't articulate it well, or simply that we never actually found out why they value that, why it's important to them. So when we generate that solution or we generate that service, it doesn't necessarily meet their needs, or we haven't looked at the culture of the organization and said, where is this a challenge in terms of implementation? Are people likely to resist and why? We haven't done the digging to understand when I transition something into the organization, what's the best method? How do I bring that in? How do I get people to adopt it? Are these people trained in how to use the new system? Did they test it? Did they find out if there are glitches or issues that might have made it unworkable? Did we actually look at the journey map? Here are the interaction points. How happy are they with the interaction points that they've got already? So if we're trying to shift left, do we understand what problem we're fixing? Because they may have a driver, but we don't necessarily understand or fix the issue that's driving their, why they're unhappy with what they're doing now. So if there's no value to them, adoption becomes a real challenge.
I also think there's a significant misperception on the part of IT of what works with self-service. I have gone into environments and taken a look at their portal, and I mean, it's like a beautiful mind. There's just stuff splattered all over their home screen. If I were a customer, the phone would be the easiest path because it's non-complex, right? I just dial the number, I wait, I get a hold of somebody. And I think the search engine companies have done a lot to drive self-service, right? I mean, we have verbs now, Google that, right? We as a society have adopted self-service. But the difference between something like Google self-service and what we're doing in our internal portals is dramatically different. Think about it. One simple box, what's your question, right? That's the simplest interface to get to knowledge in an organization. But if you got 3 clicks to get to the knowledge base, we're missing the point. And if you look at the user interface of the search engines, you'll notice that we get really good titles and summaries. And Google's actually now has a strategy to keep you on their website for you not to go anywhere else because they give you even more of a summary now, right? Now that's all a marketing ploy on their part, but it does. I don't know about you. Think of your own user behavior. Have you gone to page 2 or page 3? Almost always, if we don't find the precise answer to our question within the first 2 or 3 results, we immediately think I must have typed the question in wrong. So this isn't a matter of can our end users use self-service? They absolutely can. Even the most novice users can go to a search engine, ask a question, and get an answer, go through the results, click on something. I mean, we are trained now to do this. The problem is the way that we launch self-service internally is just, it's a disaster. The knowledge is not written in a way that it can be consumed by the end user. The title says, so network connectivity, and they're going, the internet's down. Those two things don't equate in a customer's mind, right? The summaries are not representative of the knowledge and written in a way that an end user can understand. And so this gets back to a lot of the things we've already talked about. It's about culture. It's about understanding that creating knowledge is to embetter our customers as well as ourselves. And if we write it in a way that our end users can use it, we're going to be much more successful. My personal experience with this is that customers don't use self-service that doesn't work for them. So it ties back into know the customer, it ties into culture, it ties into, bringing these data repositories into a simplified, easy to use interface. My suggestion is 1 or no clicks. That's our society. 1 click to get an answer or no clicks. It can be presented in the results or information provided just as a snapshot. That's what our customers are used to. You provide them something like that, they will use it.
And because my head is full of these statistics, as Julie well knows, my head is just full of statistics all the time from different research that we've done. And in that knowledge research that we did at the end of last year, another interesting stat that we came up with is that a lot of organizations, a predominant number of organizations have FAQs, frequently asked questions. That's the first place they go when they start building out a self-help system usually. In 83% of those organizations, those FAQs are written by support staff, which means they're not questions that customers have asked. They're probably not asked in the way that customers would ask them. They're from the internal point of view. And that's kind of where some of the remarks today were pointed, is that we're not giving those customers the experience that they expect. So let's think ITIL 4 talks about thinking holistically. And so let's zoom out a little bit here from the specific support questions and talk about some of the things that are going on organizationally. And does the continuing rise of DevOps, what does that mean for service management? There seems to be contention between 2 camps, the DevOps camp and the ITSM camp. And how do they fit together? How do they work together? Are we talking about the same things with a different vocabulary, or are we talking about 2 completely different things? And what does the demand for velocity tell us about those 2? Anybody? Bueller? Liz, you want to take a shot?
I think this is such an interesting question to kind of bubble up to the surface, because I think while they do have different focuses and may have different language, I think there's such an opportunity to marry the two, getting back to that holistic notion of bringing camps together. So while you have your DevOps that's focusing on software delivery lifecycle, and ITSM has that broad focus around customer engagement and service delivery, I think it's really a matter of what is simply recommended from an ITIL perspective, and it's kind of starting where you are. So boiling down what the objectives are to see where you have an opportunity to marry both of those camps in terms of the processes you're looking to outline. So what processes are in play? What technology do you have available at your fingertips to help you achieve the practices that you're looking to implement? And I think so much of it is really, as Julie had mentioned, really pairing those processes with your automations. So what can you do to automate the two together so you have a united front, both from those broad service objectives paired with what you're doing kind of from that software delivery?
I might even extend that a little and say it's the same divide we see from operations and development. DevOps seems to be driven out of the development product mindset, so it starts from theirs. Service management seen as coming from the infrastructure and operations side, and they're aiming at the same thing. They have different notions. They're integrated in a lot of the things that they have to execute. I'm going to do a release. How I do it might be different, but it's the same basic outcome. I'm doing the same work for the same reason. So I think they're way more integrated than people think, and the separation isn't about the approaches. The separation's in the mindset of the practitioners in a lot of cases. And I think ITIL 4 and service management, as it's moved into more agile, nimble practices, it just lines up again. I think they're trying to move fast. We're enabling more nimble execution, multiple paths to the same end with those things, as long as we meet the objective. And I think as long as those are here, we have the ability to bring them and other frameworks together, because they all spawn from a lot of the same thing. The principles and the guiding principles, very similar. The manifesto is similar. Lean has similar concepts. It's not like we're starting from different places. The perspective has shifted the execution, and that can always shift. And I think it has to shift for these things to work together, because they don't operate in isolation. Julie, you talked about complex systems. Well, this is all one complex or a nested set of complex systems. They work together. And if these things don't integrate and work effectively, you are going to create problems in your system, no matter how much you think they operate independently. We know they don't. But I think the need is to find a way to make these things work effectively, because they're not in opposition to each other. And if we're looking holistically at this is the goal of the organization, we're going to use what best fits. And if I use a bit of this and a bit of that and I integrate them, and that's the best for my organization, that was always the intent. It wasn't to be an evangelist adhering to one approach, irrespective of whether it's best suited for what I need to do or not. That to me is just crazy town. Why would I stick with something if it's not the best, or if I can incorporate something that makes it better?
The road is paved with the mistake that frameworks are mistaken for ideologies, right?
Yeah.
People have
Someone
to do
said
things
every framework.
according.
Yeah, it said every framework is wrong, just some are useful.
Well, and I think there's been a problem with the way that organizations in many cases have implemented service management, right? Process-oriented approach that was such a focus of previous versions of releases of ITIL really slowed the organization down. It felt like they became bureaucratic. And so that opened up this space for something like DevOps, where, look, we cannot slow down. We actually have to support the business. We have to bring in agile development. We have to bring development and operations closer together. And so I think that was one of the main justifications for the new version, where we start thinking about velocity. We start thinking about DevOps. We bring these concepts in. It's not process orientation. Processes are important, but they can't get in the way of ensuring that the business can evolve as quickly as it needs to in our current environment. So frameworks are as good as their adoption. And I think that I also think that DevOps has a lot of kind of resentment towards service management from that mindset of process orientation. I think once organizations begin embracing the new ideology and the value proposition and start where you are, incremental improvements, I think we'll see a lot closer alignment between these two in the organization.
If I weren't on camera, by the way, Julie, I'd be tweeting right now, frameworks are as good as their adoption. That's absolutely spot on.
I'll remind you after we're done.
Okay. We have a question here that says, especially in our new normal, how do we ensure that processes are followed for long-term health and balance that with to implement tools that are needed now? So it's that maybe that perceived conflict between velocity and long-term process success. Do you want to speak to that a little bit? Going once, going twice? Julie?
I'll take it.
Okay.
I think our idea around process needs to change, right? Processes where you start here, you end here, we measure and monitor the trend in order to create the outcome. Now we have this outcome, how successful were we? When we look at something like ITIL version 4, we're talking about value streams, right? These are things that, you know, you may be heading in one direction, but all of a sudden something new comes in, you have to incorporate that. And so you have to go back to development, right? You can't just go down this linear path, get to the end and then go back and fix the things. You have to be open and receptive to changes that need to occur as you are in the process of pushing something into the environment. So process orientation is good because it does give us some mindset of we need to accomplish these things and we want to create this outcome, but it can't be in isolation of looking at what's going on in the environment, taking in new inputs. So it is a balancing act. And I think if we set the mindset in our organization that, yeah, sure, we're looking for value as an outcome, our path to get there may not be linear. If it is, and we can cut through things very quickly, great, but that can't be, we can't put the blinders on and say, don't interrupt me until I get across the finish line and then I'll pay attention, right? We have to be much more receptive to taking in information as we're progressing.
And I think to that end, too, that speaks to another question that was also raised about the criticality of human-centered design. So I think exactly what you're saying, Julie, is so relevant to that. And especially today, I think about the organizations that I've spoken to with the turn of events and with so many groups that for the very first time, when the pandemic came out and altered the state of our work life, so many organizations for the first time ever had to have remote employees. And for a lot of folks, that changed everything. I know I'm now sharing my space with my husband and my dog, so that totally transforms the way that I'm able to complete my day-to-day. So I think to that end as well, that notion of continuous improvement paired with where are your employees? So just like you mentioned, really keeping some of those other factors and influencers, particularly like being remote, at the heart of how you're designing these processes so that folks, regardless of if you're the one who's implementing that change or getting them access to what they need, are also being taken into consideration as to how that's going to be perceived by the person who needs it.
Even sort of maybe even tying those points together, a lot of it is really focusing on understanding what you're trying to achieve for the organization through the process you're executing. So once I know what that is, I can add agility, I can add flexibility, nimbleness, different paths through that, because certain things, yeah, they're going to be simple, they're going to be straightforward. I might be able to structure a process that's linear in that case. However, as complexity of the organization changes, as velocity is there, or the needs of the organization move towards things we're not certain about, it's very hard to be prescriptive about an approach to an end you don't know. So you've got to add some flexibility. You've got to add the ability to shift and change and go back and do those things. You can actually model for that. You can create adaptability in your process, and you can add flexibility for people, which is I need this outcome, but the method by which you execute it can go through different paths and still come back to it. So if I give flexibility, it also allows people with knowledge and expertise or who are innovative to actually execute and go out and do some things and bring it back in. And maybe generate new processes, or maybe platforms a need to do something entirely different. Your process may not work for where they're going. So understanding that complexity changes the view of how you execute the process. The more complex, the less applicable a standard approach is.
And there's a lot of organizational change there, right? Because I mean, I was a programmer, right? Everything is a 1 or a 0, and that world worked for me, right? The troubleshooting, trying to find things out. There was always a basics of logic, and I think a lot of these value streams being very meandering, and the flexibility of that can be a challenge for many IT people who just want to get to that solution. They need that that kind of a clear path to where we need to go. I believe that that's one of the challenges that we face, is getting people to understand what that value stream is and how to navigate this perpetual change while you're in the middle of delivering something out to your customers. But for long-term survivability of many of these organizations, it's a requirement now. So we have to help retool our people with the knowledge and skills and the tools to support that
That's the
process.
old ABC concept, right? Let's understand the attitude, understand the behavior, the cultural aspects, and then look at what we can do to help shift probably the behavior and the attitudes first before the culture will make any type of real adjustment. So do we understand why it's a challenge? And you did a good job articulating it. So how do we move that needle, and how do we help people shift that perception and show them why it's valuable to do so? How it helps them in terms of doing so as well.
It's that incentivizing and what's in it for me that makes things happen, right? Over and over again. So one of the questions goes back to something that we talked about at the beginning, and I brought up the fact of whether ITSM is broader now, and it's broadening, and this specifically asks about enterprise service management. It says, when moving from traditional to enterprise service management, what would be the top two services? You just jumped down. That's hard to read. When moving from traditional to ESM, would it be the top 2 areas you would focus on to demonstrate value to your customers? That's a really good question. So what would you focus on when trying to push service management out or encourage other areas of the organization to take part in service management? Liz?
Yeah, I think one of the key areas, and it looks like through all the questions we've been getting, love the participation. This was also addressed in terms of bringing in those other departments. So I think that's one of the key areas when we're pivoting and propelling employee service management. I think the inclusion of all service providers has to be there. As a user, I want a one-stop shop. I don't want to have to go to several different places to get what it is I'm looking for. And I don't really care where I have to go. But if I'm in one medium, that's going to make my life so much easier, as well as everybody who's managing things from the back end, which is going to further enhance that notion of we've tapped into the culture. We know what our users are thinking. We know how our other business units are operating. So I think that's a pretty key one, is that cross-departmental collaboration and involvement under one roof. But I think one of the other areas that isn't always the most pleasant, and I also have seen being a challenge, it really speaks to that notion of continuous improvement and going through to restructure what you're doing. Customer satisfaction. Again, that seems pretty simple, but implementing surveys to really get a pulse on what the experience is really going to help you better route and deliver the services, the speed at which those are being delivered, how you're framing the content appropriately. So overall, that I think is going to make a huge impact to that experience, not only from employee service management, but that enterprise level, full involvement paired with responses, and then taking responses and actions to cultivate better automation.
Great.
And another thing I might add there is, if I'm trying to extend this capability to the organization or get everyone to look at services, one, I want them to understand service provision and understand what they're offering as a service that might go through multiple teams, because there's that. I mean, the first thing we used to say with enterprise service management was onboarding. Look at onboarding. It goes through 5 different teams. Nobody owns anything. And all 5 of you can do your stuff well, and the outcome is a crappy onboarding service and people at their desk with no network connection, no device, and anything else. Or in one case of someone I talked to, everything else was done fine, but there was no manager to meet the employee at the door, and they never got into the building. So do we understand all the value stream elements? And the other thing is, are we good enough to bring this out to the organization? So if I'm going to say, follow my lead and do this, I better be good at it. If I'm bringing something in that's not effective and they aren't happy with, they're not going to jump on board and they're not going to do it with us. especially if their stuff might be more effective? Are we open to the idea that they may have a better approach to execution of these that we can leverage? A lot of people want to push it out and don't realize other people have good processes, good understanding, good execution across their value streams and may understand it well. Can we incorporate what they do well into it as opposed to assuming what we do is the best approach?
There's another element of this that I also think is incredibly important to moving forward in that direction of enterprise service management, and that is the data behind the scenes. You have your CRM system, and people are like, yeah, no, you can't have access to our data. And then you have your IT service management data, and then you have your web analytics and all the information coming from your different channels of working with your customers. To me, the best way to know how to move forward is to bring the power of all of that knowledge together to help with breaking down those barriers and to drive the collaboration. Imagine the power of understanding the complete customer experience from the beginning to the end, where no matter where the data is stored, being able to support decision making from reliable information across those touch points. That, bringing the groups together, give them something of value. Look at this incredibly powerful knowledge that we have of the entire enterprise, and make decisions that are data driven. Collaboration is incredibly important. Processes are incredibly important. But what's in it for me? If I'm going to break down that barrier, what am I going to get from this? That orientation towards value and customer experience and using knowledge to empower where we go and how we get there. That's another critical element of that.
And I think on that data front, that also speaks to that other question we received of how you get those other groups involved by presenting them the challenge that you faced that might be similar to their department, paired with data on how that was evolved based on a solution you implemented, I think is the first step in having that conversation. Just like you were mentioning, Valence, it's great if you can bring that idea, but if it's not well thought through and then the execution is poor, that's not going to make the waves that you intended. So I think pairing data to have that conversation around value co-creation and collaboration is really where you can begin to extend the footprint with those other key departments.
Thank you all for great responses there. And we've got a couple of questions here that revolve around change management, or as it's now called, change enablement. And maybe, if you haven't read up on ITIL 4 or taken a class in ITIL 4, you didn't know that, but it's called change enablement now. It was originally change control when ITIL 4 was introduced, became change enablement shortly thereafter. And it's been a bone of contention, and that usually is where DevOps collides with IT service management, right at the point of change management or change enablement, whatever you want to call it. And so how does that work in a high velocity organization? What do newer frameworks and methodologies tell us about how we can structure changes to be better introduced into the systems without slowing things down?
So I'm going to jump on this one because I have a really good story around this. I was attending a conference, and I decided to step into, just walked into a room just to kind of hear what was going on. And I walked in, and no kidding, 3 minutes after I walked in, the guy said, I don't know if there's anybody from IT in here. And I apologize for this, but we completely avoided IT. It takes them too long to respond. They run everything through change management. So we just went out and bought the product on our own and implemented it, and we're getting the value. And I think that's the difference between change management or change control and change enablement. They should see this as something that helps them to introduce change into the environment more successfully, managing risk, but with velocity. And the problem was our execution of change management slowed everything down. It became bureaucratic. Things were scheduled way out in advance, and it just does not fit the needs of organizations today. So we want to see it as something that helps us to manage risk, but at the same time, enables our organization to progress through these development cycles, to get releases into the environment that will help us to provide better quality of products and services, and not slow that innovation process down.
Yeah. And in a lot of cases, how many people actually measured how often were we successful at getting the changes in that the organization needs as a key metric of change management before, change enablement now. And I'm happy about that shift in the naming, because it focuses people on the fact that we're trying to successfully get these in when they're needed. Its job is not to control and crush the ability to move. And I used to be a part of a cab or lead cabs back in the good old days, or the old days, however you want to look at it. And it really was just a control exercise. And you had 20 people on there, 15 of whom had no sense of or implications around that change. So even changing up and modeling enablement differently, we do that in DevOps, we do that in Agile. Only the people in that team who are relevant actually do it, and they're looking at it all the time, and they may do it as part of a daily Scrum or daily exercise. So every day we're going to have that Kanban board up. We're going to talk about changes. We're going to say we're good to go, and it's contained within that group. So there are a lot of different models executing change to give you velocity. Product owner can own it within their sphere of command, and they may be able to make active changes. So the idea to me was, change is a good idea. Some of the control points make tons of sense. It was the execution and the thought that one size and one model fit all that was the problem. So if you add adaptability, really keep it to the people who really are important to understanding whether that change should be done or not. You can shrink it down. You don't need a cab for anything. You don't need to pass through. And if it's automated, I can have the automation do those checkpoints for me. I don't need to pass through all these gates that we built. So just looking at it in a flexible way that says, how do I make it work, as opposed to how do I control it? We need to understand and deal with it, because that's an area that's horribly executed in most companies, from what I can tell. Risk is head in the sand until it happens. So getting it in there is important, but making sure that the end goal is still to get these things in, shift the way you think about it, the way you design your processes, and how flexible.
This is an interesting question. And I think there's a bunch of different ways to answer it. What about intelligent swarming as a support model for knowledge management? And I think that perhaps there's a methodology that directly supports that concept, where everybody contributes to knowledge and it's available rapidly. Julie, I think you know what I'm referring to, and I will hit you with that one first, and we'll take a round robin on it. Intelligent swarming and knowledge management.
I think you're alluding to the KCS model. Would that
Perhaps
be?
I am.
And I've just written a paper on helping global support organizations with knowledge management being a very core component of a global delivery model. And I did a substantial amount of research in this area called co-creation. A lot of times our knowledge management is viewed as something that the support organization owns. And I think we have to expand that viewpoint, that it's information coming from our customers. It's information coming from our business processes. It's information coming from IT. This idea of going to the resource that has the information, but making sure that we're capturing that in a way that it can be reused. We talk about intelligent swarming. The primary focus is in swarming, finding the subject matter expert, being able to capture that knowledge in the moment, so that while we still have the customer in that interaction, we can apply that knowledge, right? Finding the right person as quickly as possible, because most of the information's already been captured. It's in the knowledge base, so if it's known, the customers can find the answer. They don't call in about the stuff we know. They call in about stuff we don't know. So it becomes a pass-through. So instead of just escalating everything, we need to bring the subject matter experts in this swarm in order to solve and capture that knowledge. And from my perspective, that intelligent swarming is more than just an IT thing. It needs to be something where we're incorporating business knowledge and business process knowledge. Again, breaking down those barriers, collaboration across those units. I think as soon as we can get our organization to focus on knowledge management across the board as a core asset of what drives and propels us to be successful, we're not going to be successful. It's a core element for everything that we've talked about here today, and it helps to propel organizations in the right direction. So from an intelligent swarming perspective, it's more than just a support model. This is a business model, connecting people to information and subject matter experts in order to meet the changing needs of customers and the business real time.
I might add also in that sense, to me, the biggest gain from that is the ability to get tacit knowledge out of people. There's a lot of things I don't think about until the moment I actually need it. So the sooner I get to that person, the more likely it is I'm going to gather information they don't necessarily realize they know. Pulling information out of people that's so inherent to them that they can't even describe it doesn't really happen very well unless you have a mechanism and some type of swarming to gather that at that point. So this is a really good mechanism for gathering that information at the point in time when you can actually get it out of people and add that to your information. And as you said, ITIL 4 talks about knowledge management as a general management practice. And there's a reason, because it came in from outside and it's an organizational thing you do. It shouldn't just sit within IT. It should be looking at how we handle information across the board. The biggest challenge I see in it is if an organization is not committed to doing it, they don't allocate the time to it. And if you do not have time, if you do not have Slack, if you don't have some ability to pull those people, much as you want to do it, it becomes very difficult to do it. So there has to be a real mindset shift, and we want to do this, and we're going to make sure we free up the ability to gather this information at that point in time. It's the same challenge you see with implementations, with governance, and other things. If I don't actually free up time for the people who are supposed to do it, they get stuck in the day-to-day, they get stuck in the tactics, stuck in everything else, and there's no time to do it. So freeing up time becomes critical.
And I think you mentioned something really important, is that I guarantee you every organization has intelligent swarming going on today. Right? There's a chat window popped up. I go to the person that I know knows the answer to this. The key is making this a formal business model, not just something we do in order to help provide great quality service. It's something that we do as an organization, and it's our mindset, right? Go to the person, capture it as we're in that interaction so that we can use that information intelligently.
Well said, because it's usually the first response when something happens or we need some information. We swivel around in the chair and say, "Hey, Bob, do you know anything about this?" Which is one of the differences of working at home now, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So digital transformation has popped up a couple of different times here, and everybody seems to have their own slightly different definition of what that means, and it's everywhere. Every blog post you're looking at digital transformation, businesses are talking about it a lot. I'd just like to go around quickly and say, what does it mean? What does that mean to you? What does that phrase mean? Liz, you want to start us off?
Yeah, I think with digital transformation, it's keeping you relevant and giving you the opportunity to better compete and deliver. So leaning on smarter technologies, I think that's been a huge component from what we've seen in blogs, at conferences, leaning in on what the artificial intelligence can help you drive to really transform your business initiatives digitally is huge. You're able to look at trends to help better understand, when am I going to get a high volume of requests? Something so simple so that you can then understand, what does my headcount need to be? Who do we need to have present for items like that? So I think with digital transformation, it's not only evolving what you're understanding from a data perspective, but also what are you using to deliver those services, be it things with a smarter portal, using chat bots, things of that nature. So I think that's huge. And for me personally, again, I think about myself as a consumer and how much more receptive I am when I have those digital tools at my fingertips.
Yeah, and maybe alongside and even carrying with that, it really is just as a business, what is it that I do? And if I'm going to look at it in the concept of, let's look at all the available technology and data, how am I able to execute my business in a way leveraging the new technology? It doesn't mean I have to change everything to a digital approach, but what are the things I can optimize or do differently, or create entirely new products within my stream because these technologies and these capabilities are out there in the world? And also, not just how do I produce new products, new services, new capabilities for my clients, but how do I use that to improve the employee experience in a digital way that might improve the relationship they have and we have with our customers as well. So look at their experience and improving that, which improves the customer experience. And how do we generate or improve those things through digital technologies where appropriate? And for me, that's the biggest thing. It's restaurant. There's a lot of things I can do digitally. I still have to cook food. And I'm probably going to do that by hand. So what are the things I improve digitally from that experience that makes sense?
I think one of the reasons why we struggle with defining what digital transformation is because it's different things for different companies.
Yeah.
Digital transformation can be, we have not upgraded for a long period of time. We've held on to our funding. So maybe it's just automating something that before was a very manual process. to full on out adoptions of new technologies of doing things different ways. One of the things I think that's really important is that we view this from a customer perspective. I was working with a healthcare organization. Right, they're struggling internally in IT to keep the systems up to date and keep up with the rapid pace of all these applications that are changing in the environment. And yet, doctors are meeting with patients via the telephone, right? An app. They're doing video chat. So you see this digital transformation on the business side, where they are, really reinventing the patient interface and the way that they provide care. Versus IT still struggling with rolling out applications and keeping the desktop up to date. So digital transformation is technology, it's data, it's process, but it's also very much focused on the customer experience. Where can we innovate with our technologies to better serve our customers in ways that will innovate for them? All too often, we start with the digital. Well, we have to start with the digital transformation internally, right? We've got to get some of this constant, perpetual work off of our plates in order to innovate and continue to evolve. But really, where I see digital transformation making a difference is when it changes the way that the company interfaces with its customers, the way it delivers its products and services. There are so many examples out there where companies have innovated and really turned an industry upside down because they simply began thinking about the problem in a new way. We get so accustomed to thinking about this is the only way to solve something that we generally are not open and receptive to those innovative ideas. So I think if you throw something in there like design thinking, you have the technology that can help drive it. You have the data to help empower making the right decisions. Digital transformation is challenging for organizations. Start small. Start with just one project and build from there. But it requires collaboration across the business into IT. This is not just an IT thing. This should be really driven towards business results, business value.
I also tend to say innovation tends to be drawn by annoyance and anger as much as it is by design. Most of the big innovations I've seen have come because someone was really upset by the way things were executed and how it didn't work for them. Uber couldn't get a cab in that city. IKEA, they blocked me off from all the designers in my area, and I didn't have enough people to go get the stuff for them. So go get it yourself became their model. So many things came out of absolute necessity or absolute fury. So understand that there are a lot of drivers for innovation, and digital, as you mentioned, in terms of health. What has COVID-19 done to the use of health apps for information and tracking telehealth? That's a massive leap forward, and now they have to trust the data because that's the most safe way to gather some information. So it's going to create that digital channel to those digital health apps and maybe refine it down from 300,000 to a core 2,000 that are effective, but it will drive that forward because innovation and necessity come.
It's interesting you brought in the pandemic, because I think that and I'm just looking from the isolated experiences that I've been having, that there are a lot of industries that are being propelled into doing something that they weren't ready to do.
Correct.
And I would like to see, as a result of this, of people thinking about delivery of what they do in new and innovative ways. For example, I'm just going to take, because this is something that I'm experiencing, education. Right? They've been thrown into a virtual delivery model. Kids didn't have computers. They didn't have network access, right? So we're scrambling to figure out how to deliver virtually. Imagine a classroom in the future where, we're all meeting in the classroom, but kids are homesick or for whatever reason they couldn't come in today. Why can't they just jump into the classroom virtually, right? Why is this such a significant barrier for these industries? I think this is an incredible opportunity. We had to change like that. And there are so many industries that haven't changed for decades that we're left going, how do we do this? So I think it's like a taste. You can do this. And by the way, you should have been thinking about this, and you should be thinking about how to incorporate some of this agile thinking, the ability to flip a switch and to do things in a different way. Because I can't think of a better way to serve your customers than to provide options in the way that happens. And yet you've got organizations, oh, we'll never allow remote workers. Oh, hello.
Right. So
Welcome to the new world.
on that note, I will pull out one more stat for you, and it is that last year, 4% of organizations said that they were planning on implementing work from home this year. Surprise! So there we go. I would like to certainly thank our sponsor, SolarWinds, for enabling us to do this. It's great to be able to talk with all of you. Thank you, Valence Howden, Julie Moore, Liz Beavers. Thank you so much for being with us out there in the audience, for your thoughtful questions, and we'll see you down the road. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.